Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to Black Ops Cold War in Depth. In today's episode, we're going to be reviewing the XM4 assault rifle, which is the first one that you unlock in the assault rifle class, and the assault rifle class is actually the last one for me to cover during the standard weapon guide series portion of In Depth. After this, we're going to be starting to get into more weird topics, and I'm working on unlocking the Street Sweeper shotgun. The XM4 is the standard to which all other weapons must be compared. It really is basically the M4 for this COD game, the Commando for Black Ops 1. It is the most basic, easy to use and understand weapon in the game, and you might think that means it's bad, but it has no major drawbacks whatsoever, also no major strengths. But what that means is that the XM4 is at least very versatile. It works well or good enough in almost every single situation. No sponsors or anything today, just want to give myself a shout out. You should totally check out my Twitch streams. It's linked down there below. Bunch of social links down there below for you to check out. I do a lot of in-depth live on stream, so if you'd like to see a creative process happening, you can pop on in sometime. But let's get back to the stats. The XM4 bullet velocity is 550 meters per second, which is a little bit slow for assault rifles. Most assault rifles in Black Ops Cold War are about 650 meters per second. The AK is actually a little bit slower, and even though it may be a little bit slow for assault rifles, it's not bad overall. There's quite a few guns in this game that have deceptively and problematically low bullet velocities. It isn't one of them. The XM4 is mostly going to feel normal. You really won't feel that bullet velocity penalty very much. And the maximum damage range is 46 meters, which is just awesome. That is just beautiful. Most, but not all of the assault rifles in this game have very long maximum damage ranges. And of course, you can put barrels on to double this. So if you want, you can effectively have the same shots to kill anywhere on the map. Speaking of shots to kill, let's talk about the damage. The XM4 base damage is 30 to 28. It's very consistent. You only lose 2 points of damage over that 46 something meters. And if you run the Task Force barrel, you get a small bonus, picking it up to 32 damage up close and then 30 at long ranges. What this means is that with your basic barrel, it will kill in either 5 or 6 shots, depending on how far away the enemy is, or 4 shots if you're hitting headshots, which to me means that headshots aren't that valuable on the weapon. I usually go for them just for camos and to crank out a little bit of extra damage, but there's nothing really crazy special going on with headshots. It has the standard 1.4x multiplier. The Task Force barrel, however, can decrease your long-range shots to kill by 1, since you're picking your damage up by 1 instead of being 6 shots to kill at long range. That means it's 5 up close and 5 at long range, giving it a sort of ultimate consistency no matter how far away the enemies are, which is a really good thing, and some people will be attracted to that. But personally, I don't think the Task Force barrel is worth the major recoil penalties. You'll see on the barrel attachment that you lose both horizontal and vertical recoil and ammo capacity, which is just huge downsides to me. I would rather hit my shots and take one more than I would have the same shots to kill infinitely. In my opinion, you'd be better off using a barrel to increase either your range or your bullet velocity, just kind of depending on which one you prefer. Moving along in the time to kill section, because this is kind of all what it builds up to, the XM4 rate of fire is 720 rounds per minute, which is probably the most normal thing ever in Call of Duty. I've been doing this for about a decade now, and 720 rounds per minute is just one of those numbers that the developers love to use. It feels good in your hands. It'll feel like a normal assault rifle rate of fire, and again, it's just right there in the middle of the pack. What this means is that your XM4 body shot time to kill is 332 milliseconds. Unsurprisingly, with average damage, average range, and average rate of fire, this is very average for assault rifles. This is almost perfectly in the middle of the pack, and it's almost perfectly in the middle of the pack for the entire game. There are weapons that can kill significantly faster than this. They often have a lot of weird drawbacks and penalties, and there are some weapons that kill much slower but have better handling or lower recoil or something like that. This one's just very, very normal. Recoil, however, is in kind of a weird place, and I'm comparing this a lot to other weapons in other Call of Duty games because this is the first assault rifle that I used in Black Ops Cold War. I've been going through pistols and SMGs and stuff. I haven't even touched assault rifles before this. So I will say that the recoil on the XM4 is lower than average for most Call of Duty games. If this is your first Call of Duty game and you haven't played with assault rifles very much, this one will probably feel like a relatively low recoil one, but there's a lot of low recoil assault rifles in Black Ops Cold War, so within the context of Cold War, it's still pretty mediocre. I expected this weapon to be kind of a laser because of how many people have killed me with it over the last couple days of running pistols and SMGs, but it really wasn't. It had some noticeable noticeable recoil. And in my experience with it, I had more trouble with the visual shake than the actual recoil itself. The actual recoil itself was mostly vertical and would slightly drift to the side, but was overall easy to control. However, the shake on my barrel I found to be quite violent, especially when using iron sights, and it caused some difficulty in tracking of targets. Speaking of iron sights, I do not believe the iron sights are good enough for long-range combat, not because they're bad, because they're kind of actually not, but because of that shake that I mentioned and the gas and muzzle flash. The actual iron sights are clear enough for me to see and kill people with at surprising ranges if I'm going really slow and careful, but if I'm going to go full auto, the weapon's going to shake like crazy, it's going to kick up so I can't see my target. I have issues distinguishing targets on dark maps like Miami when there's gas and muzzle flash coming out of the end of my barrel, and it makes it a lot harder for me to use, which is why I gravitate towards some sort of optical attachments on this weapon. Handling stats are pretty normal. Aim down sights times 300 milliseconds, sprint out 226, a little bit faster than I would have expected on the sprint out time right there. So your sprint out to hip fire is probably going to be a better bet than just raw ADSing people when they come close to you, so that's something to keep in mind. And there's not much variety in handling stats for assault rifles. There are very few weapons that deviate from the numbers that you just saw in any significant way. So the XM4 is again very average even inside of its own class. Even the hipfire is average, 7.5 milliradians. We've seen this number over and over and over again. The reload time, oddly a little bit slow, 2.6 seconds, kind of on the slower end of things for assault rifles. And when it comes to magazines, there's like 10 different magazines you can put on the gun to change your reload speed, mag reserve, mag count, anything. So subjectively, I struggle with small mags on my XM4, and maybe just because it was the first assault rifle I was using, so I was kind of learning how to use them. I missed a lot, I sprayed a lot, and I greatly preferred some kind of extended mag over almost anything else. I enjoyed the extended mags more than the fast mags, and I even enjoyed the giant ones with the negative 25% ADS time penalties in a lot of cases. So a lot of in-depth has been me telling you that the weapon is average a lot of times today. Just saying that's average, this is average, bearer of standards, normal, normal, normal. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. That also means that this weapon has no weaknesses, unless you want to count the slightly slower than average reload time. And with no weaknesses, that means the XM4 works well in pretty much every single situation. There's not really a situation where you can't make use of this gun, where it's bad or where it'll put you at a disadvantage. It's good or at least reasonable almost everywhere. Except I will say I'm not a fan of it in Warzone. I really don't like its Warzone performance, but a lot of the Cold War guns are goofy. They're either completely useless or ridiculously overpowered. I do pick the XM4 up off the ground in Warzone and use it because it has the built-in suppressor, and I love me some suppressors in Battle Royale. But we're going to mostly talk about Cold War today. That's an entirely different video for a different time. You can kit the XM4 for speed, for stealth, for range, or even for bullet velocity if you just want to go for really, really long shots. There is a build for almost anything that you want for the XM4 because it is so versatile. Personally, I had a rough time with suppressors and the stealth builds and the speed builds, but the one that I really enjoyed was actually the generic red dot sight COD 4 kind of class, which is what I'm going to be recommending here at the end of this episode. And I know that sounds almost like I'm going through the motions and I'm just kind of recommending the same thing that everybody uses. It just really works well on this weapon. We're going to have a lot more creative stuff coming up for the Krig and AK-47 episodes that you don't normally see me recommending, but this one works well with a lot of these standard attachments. So I like to use Gunfighter to get all 8 of my attachments ready to go. Not a lot of them are going to surprise you. The Microflex LED is the easiest to use, cleanest sight in the entire game, and I'd recommend it on almost any gun. I use the SOCOM Eliminator to give me a little bit of muzzle flash concealment, but also mostly just reduce that vertical recoil. I will either use the takedown barrel or the extended or the reinforced heavy barrel. I can go for either range or bullet velocity or a little mix of both, just kind of depending on what I want. For this particular weapon, more often than not, I'm going for bullet velocity, but I did mix it up a little bit. Steady aim laser for plus 20% hip fire, and we're avoiding the SWAT 5 milliwatt primarily because I want to avoid any further ADS time penalties because we're going to be putting some attachments on later that are a little bit rough in that regard. If you're going to play super long range, Ember sighting point, but otherwise I would say you may not need it. Like most of the other weapons in the game, I'm a big fan of the field agent grip because it reduces your recoil. However, on assault rifles, the shooting move speed speed penalties are far more noticeable. This one has a negative 26%, which is just downright brutal. And when I start shooting this particular build, I kind of freeze in place, and that almost makes me feel like I'm quickscoping in a way. Sometimes it's very difficult to deal with. I had to adjust my playstyle significantly so that I was sitting still while shooting instead of bouncing around. And even still, I thought it was the best attachment for this weapon, but not for a lot of the other assault rifles, which we'll get into later. The Salvo 50 round fast mag, hard to beat. Gigantic magazine, reloads really fast. It does take a big penalty to aim down sights time, which is why I was avoiding some of the other ADS time penalty attachments, but we'll pretty much fix that and cancel it out with the airborne elastic wrap, which is glorious. We do take a sprint out time penalty, which kind of stinks, but it does let us drop shot, which is really important. And an attachment that I've been really enjoying on a lot of weapons lately is the Raider pad. It gives me faster sprint out time, which is great. And most importantly for this weapon, a faster aim walking movement speed. It lets me strafe and check corners and ADS much more efficiently. I've been using it on a lot of assault rifles. It does make my hip fire kind of terrible. That's a big penalty that I'm going to take, but I'm trying really not to get in people's faces with this weapon a whole lot, and therefore I think the hip fire penalty isn't so bad. So yes, I know that is sort of a generic basic class that a lot of you could have come up with on your own, but I'm telling you, it's a generic average weapon. It's the bearer of standards, so putting relatively standard attachments on it gets me really good performance. It'll work. That build that I just showed you will work on almost any map in the game to some degree. It may not be the best thing, but you will pretty much never have to take that class off, and no matter what situation you find yourself in, you can always fall back on the XM4. Guys, that is all for this episode of In Depth. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something useful, and we'll be moving on to the AK-47 and maybe then the Street Sweeper after that. Drifter out.